What's happening, folks? Coach Darryl Johnson here, founder of HTK Krav Maga and Hard Target Kids. I'm going to talk a minute for today about the branding of our programs. And over the last few years, as I put together our own version of Krav Maga and self-defense and fitness, I've gotten a lot of feedback from people who do business. Obviously, although I like to think I know a few things, I like to talk to people who know even more things. I think that's a smart thing to do in business. And some of the feedback that a few people have had is like, oh, the name of your company, that Harder to Kill, is it's very aggressive, and it might be off-putting to people, and maybe you should soften it up and make it more palatable and less intimidating for people. Or maybe people don't want to think about being killed. They don't want to think about being vulnerable, and there's a lot of truth to that. There definitely is. Um, and along with that goes the name of our so HTK is Harder to Kill, or hard to knock down, harder to kill for Krav Maga. But for the kids, it's Hard Target Kids, and I really been thinking a lot about this over the last many years. Is we have spent a couple of generations now making kids soft, and then I hate to be that guy. I'm like, oh, back in my day it was different. But the reality is and I've talked about this in other videos. I was actually a part of this machine. I remember when I started teaching martial arts professionally, it was in the early '90s, which was the height of the kids' boom in martial arts. It was the beginning, or at least mid swing of the participation trophy, world. It was when people started really emphasizing feelings over results, because no one wants to feel bad. And although I was lucky, the school I was teaching in was way more based as far as like achievement and actual effort and results over just feelings. But there was definitely a movement in our culture where the person's happiness and feelings were the top priority, and that's a factor of the commercial reality that most almost all buying decisions are emotional. So, and then when we have a culture, and the populace is even more emotional than before and less based on reality and more based on feelings, you're going to get a lot more of that skew to emotional based discussion. And I'll tell you a quick story. I was at a martial arts workshop, how to be a better instructor, how to improve your school, etc. I've been to lots of these, and business in general, but specifically martial arts a lot of times too. And I'll never forget this discussion we were having. And there was a well-known, if you're in the martial arts world, you'll know very much who this person was leading this conversation. They're you can say that they're a mile high in the uh, martial arts world. Anyway, there's a question we were having about rotating curriculum, which basically means instead of having white, yellow, only white belts learn this, only yellow belts learn this, or orange belts, whatever the case might be, is you have a basic, you have a level of curriculum. You have, let's say there's 30 moves in this level, and rather than going, oh, okay, white belts have to learn this and yellow belts have to learn this, and they can't learn the yellow belt stuff before the white belt stuff. What it means is you take that body of curriculum and you basically split it into pieces, 3, 4, whatever, how many belts you want to have in there. And when someone comes in, they learn a chunk of that, and it doesn't really matter so much what they learn in the beginning. Obviously, there's fundamental techniques they have to learn, but anyway, the question was, well, in a rotating curriculum, if you have a student who doesn't pass, they don't move up, are they going to be still learning the new material, or do they keep the old belt? And that's not really, I'm kind of off on a tangent there. I apologize. I get nerdy about this stuff. I geek out on this. The question is what if you have a student who doesn't pass? So you have 20 students testing, 19 of them pass, they're all on the same level, one doesn't make it. What do you do with that student? Do you keep the belt back? Do you make them re-earn it? And I'll never forget, the answer to this question was, well, I would just pass him anyway, make sure he moves along with his peers or her peers so they don't quit and they stay in the program longer. And there's a lot of truth to that. And I'll say that because I've had students in my years, children, sometimes adults, where if they don't pass a test, because in our school you can actually, failing a test is still an option, where the student didn't do well or didn't do as well as the parents thought, and the parents would literally take the kid out of the program. They would cancel the membership because the student didn't pass or didn't pass at the level they thought they should, whatever. So there's truth to that, but I couldn't believe that he was saying like, all right, well the student didn't meet the standards you set, so instead of things like I don't know, maybe doing a retest or maybe working with them one on one or doing private lessons, and then letting him advance. The answer was just pass them anyway, and then do your best to get them caught up. And this was not a rare thing in this world. And again, my concern was is feelings and the person's happiness was by far the most important part of the training, especially with children, but really with adults too. And so we got to the point where here we are 20 years later, or 30 years later, actually almost 30 years later now, actually exactly 30 years later, where we have a whole generation of people who are literally compelled to make decisions based completely on their feelings. The reality is not even an entity in their world. Everything's about their feelings. If you don't see the world their way, they throw tantrums, they refuse to work, they will simply they'll if you say the wrong word or if you don't see the world through their view, they will contact your employer, they will contact everybody you've ever worked with, they'll try to get you arrested, try to get you fired. And that's a bizarre thing to someone from me, because I've always believed in meritocracy. Anyway, so I called the kids program. It's hard target kids, and it's not for everybody. If you believe that feelings are the most important metric by which to make decisions in your life, then you're probably going to find our program a bit abrasive, maybe too real. So because again, in our program, if a kid's doing a belt test and he or she doesn't complete the standards, they won't be allowed to promote. Again, obviously, we're not going to just throw them off the side. We're going to work with them, but things of that nature. And I expect kids to work through challenging situations. I expect kids to, have failures. Failure is not a bad thing. It's a blessing many times. Many times the best advances in my life, physically and professionally, have come from a failure. Something didn't work out the way I expected it to, through my fault or through external circumstances, whatever the case might be. And rather than like letting my feelings dictate that and being a miserable, depressed person and going on all kinds of drugs and antidepressants and medicating with alcohol or whatever the case might be, he's like, I gotta, this didn't work out the way I wanted it to. What can I do to resolve this situation? How can I fix this? That is the tack that I usually try to take. And I hope my students get that too. If they're learning a move and they're not getting it, rather than giving up or me not letting, I want to find a way to get through to them. I spend a lot of my time when I teaching is, if I find a technique is challenging to the students, I go, okay, how can I make this easier to understand? What can I do? As opposed to like, oh, these guys they just aren't going to get it. They're not athletic enough. They're not coordinated enough. They're not smart enough. I'm going to say, okay, how can I make this better? But yet, I still expect them to do the technique. I still expect them to meet the standard. And that makes me a bit of maybe a dinosaur. Anyway, so that's our philosophy. It's all about meritocracy. It's all about developing the mental toughness through having challenges and overcoming them. I believe self-esteem is earned. You don't just get self-esteem. You can't give someone self-esteem, or at least you shouldn't. They get self-esteem by being faced with a challenge, and this is adults too, faced with a challenge, having to dig down a little bit to overcome that challenge, and that's how you become hard to knock down, harder to kill, how you become a hard target. So when things go wrong and someone assaults you, or whether it's verbally or physically, you have the ability to withstand that and actually move forward in your life, not letting the simple emotional response of maybe hurt feelings or disappointment stop you in your tracks. And that's the HTK philosophy. So if that resonates with you, we'd love to have you in the family. And I totally understand a lot of people are not going to be down with that. It's a different world today. And I feel a little bad because I think some of my earlier career was I was listening to the experts about making sure they're happy. Don't let them be upset, and if they get upset, make sure that you make them happy, and as opposed to like having them just deal with disappointment. It's part of life. It's part of growth. All right, Coach Jay out. Hope that makes sense. And if you have any questions, hit me up. Talk to you later. Bye.